Welcome to the podcast, Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. I'm your host, Mike Allen. Sticks and stones might break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Or at least so goes the old children's rhyme. Well, what about stones that actually bring people together? The first select woman of Madison, Peggy Lyons, has a simply great tale about a tradition that's as old as the hills of south central Connecticut that involves hiking, political camaraderie, and yes, stones. It's a great story, mixing history, politeness, and fun in a manner that's brought three towns together now for hundreds of years. Peggy's going to be along in just a moment with this story. This week's trivia question: he saw a chef's hat through smoke, tactical soldiers in insect mode, and children's daycare chairs covered in soots. What was it that Connecticut's John Maher saw? Stick around after the main program for the answer, because then you're going to know our topic for next week's show. Well, psychologists tell us one great way to break the strains of stress is to take a walk, get out and enjoy nature. Slow down, smell the roses. Well, for quite a number of years, 3 Connecticut towns have been doing just that. Now, not to get from under stressful conditions per se, but the outcome is a coming together, even when the participants are mixtures of Republicans, Democrats, and independents. It's about a tradition that started eons ago in other parts of the world and was brought to the States by the European settlers who came to Connecticut almost 400 years ago. That tradition? Walking the boundary of your town once a year. And yes, there are 3 towns that do this in Connecticut, or at least in a fashion. They don't exactly walk the entire perimeters of their town, and they don't exactly do it every year, but at the end of the walk, they meet up together and exchange pleasantries. And the small band of townspeople who follow along their chief elected officials in this ritual get to know one another and see each other as just plain people, as opposed to persons with maybe political agendas. This ritual does not occur every year. In fact, it's been about 15 years since the last one occurred between the towns of Guilford, Durham, and Madison. The first select woman of Madison is Peggy Lyons. She led roughly 24 Madisonites on this outing in October of 2024, meeting in the beautiful section of woods with the chief elected officials of her neighboring towns at the point where their towns come together. And they had to bring something special with them, something that they would leave behind to mark the occasion. Well, Peggy, let's start off talking about this very unique and, quite frankly, special tradition that exists between you and your neighboring towns of Durham and Guilford. Now, you've been in the first select woman's office for a couple of terms now, and this item undoubtedly was not included in your job description. How did you even find out this tradition existed?
Well, I'm very lucky because one of the members of the Board of Selectmen that serves with me is a former first selectman, Al Goldberg. He served in Madison, I guess a little over almost 10 years ago now, and he conducted this boundary walk when he was first selectman. And he's an avid reader of history and loves to talk about Madison history. He's also on the Land Trust Board, loves to take hikes. So he's been pestering me to do this since I got elected. When I say pester, I say that tongue-in-cheek, because he really enjoyed it, and he thought it's a great way to bring communities together.
Now, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, my family and I used to live in Switzerland, and there on the 1st January of every year, the citizens were led around the perimeter of their town boundaries by their elected leaders, just so they could kind of get familiar with where they lived and take some pride in their hometown. And it's really a very wonderful tradition. It's been going on actually for centuries there. Now, obviously, you didn't walk the entire perimeter of Madison last October. It's a very large geographical area, but just how far did you hike, and how insistent were you about making sure you stayed on the town border itself?
Well, we're lucky because there's a marked path. It's called the Selectmen's Walk, but you have to hike a bit to get to the Selectmen's Walk. Interestingly, each town we meet at the central point, right? So each town has a path to get there. Our path is in Rockland Preserve. We have this beautiful park in the northern part of our town that is well known for hiking as well as biking trails. You kind of have to start at the southern end of the park and then work your way north to get to the area where the 3 towns meet, the 3 boundaries. So I had the longest hike by far. So it was a couple of miles. It took us probably an hour to hike there, where the other towns only had like a 15-minute hike to get there.
Now, there's something about the selectmen's stones, which are eventually placed where the three of you came together at the point where your boundaries meet, right? How do those stones get transported to the site?
Interestingly, you have to carry your stone. So my stone is kind of heavy. And I didn't really think it through very well in terms of, I got to carry this thing. So I did bring a backpack along, and luckily my entire board joined. One member was traveling. I couldn't be there. So I requested that I had assistance to carry the stone from them.
Now, this isn't just some idea that cropped up in Madison a few decades ago. This has actually been going on for hundreds of years, right?
This is a tradition that goes back, more than a century for the town. I think somewhere over time it served a purpose, to mark the boundaries between the three communities. And it was a way to confirm those boundaries, that everybody was following things appropriately. I think the selectmen actually used to walk the whole boundary up in this area to make sure that everybody was following the rules. Obviously, we don't do that now. And at one point, it became ceremonial.
Well, I suppose that, like all good traditions, you have some evidence from past outings.
We have some photos that we found. It's happened in the 60s, it happened in the 70s. And then my colleague, Al Goldberg, had kind of revitalized it back in, I think it was 2006 or 2007.
So how did you actually go about arranging this? What exactly did you do?
We basically announced that we were going to be doing this to the public. We invited the public to join us, along with members of the land trust. I coordinated this with the other selectmen. So we had to pick a time that we agreed to meet at this meeting point. And then we promoted, at least in Madison we did, we put out a bunch of inviting members of the public to come and join us and meet at a point at our park where we were going to park and gather together. We ended up having probably 20 people from Madison. I'm trying to remember now. This was in October. A really nice crowd showed up, and some were just people that heard about it and thought it sounded really cool. Some of them were members of the land trust who always look for opportunities to hike. And so we kind of gathered around, and then a member of the land trust kind of had mapped out what the trail would be that we would be taking to get there. I'm not an avid hiker. I do hike occasionally, but I don't know all the trails up there. And this is the first time I'd been on this trail.
So coming back to the Selectman's Stone, just tell me a little bit more about this. It's not just some rock you pick up somewhere. You got to put a lot of effort into it, don't you?
So the tradition is that the selectmen endorse the boundary, right, by putting a stone with their initials carved in it at the selectmen's stones pile where the three towns meet. Funnily enough, Al told me that when they had done this a ways back, he was instructed he had to hand carve his stone with his initials on it and then carry that up. And he had to use this special tool. And I think the three towns had agreed to have one stone where they would each carve their initials on the one stone. He said, I highly recommend using power tools this time. So, because he said it's not so easy to carve and it takes a long time, and and we kind of had pulled this together more quickly. And so I met with the first selectman at Guilford and Durham. We had a call, and we agreed we were going to do our own stones, and we would allow power tools. So, because we just, this was 2 weeks out or whatever, and everybody's very busy, and we didn't want this to be wanted to see fun, right? This is more about having fun, bringing people together. It's not about strict traditions or anything. But you have to start thinking, I got to carry a stone, how do I do it? What power tool? So each of the selectmen kind of went off and did research, and we were exchanging ideas about what the best drill bit would be to use and stuff. So that was kind of fun. So we each got our stones and, had worked on our stones. And I was having a problem, I'll be honest, with my stone because I'd gotten this drill bit and was having a terrible time with it, and it wasn't coming out very good. And I'm sharing a confidence that the first selectman of Durham is very handy and has a workshop. And he said, well, I got my rocks from Meeks Point in Madison, and I've got this tool. So he actually did initials for me on his stone, on a stone that he had collected. And I had mine, and I came up, and when I saw his looked much better and more professional, I'll say, so I carried that stone up to the Selectman stone. And so we kind of had a joke about it that, it's a Madison rock with a Durham first selectman carving it. But I had my own too, but it was very well done, his was.
So you had about 20 participants from Madison. What about the other towns?
Guilford had a number of their land trust people join him, and then Durham had a few people with his contingency. So we kind of worked out how long it was going to take to get there, and that we would have a meeting time that worked for everybody. And I will say it was a delightful hike. There's a beautiful pond up in Rockland Preserve that is where you kind of pick up the Selectman's Walk, and I'd never seen this, and very scenic and beautiful. And October is a great time of year to go hiking, obviously. It's gorgeous out in the woods.
So you were together for a couple of miles. What were you talking about? What was the conversation like?
It allowed a lot of us to talk about our town, that was on the Madison contingency, and how fortunate we are to have these types of parks, resources available to us, the opportunity to do things like this. It's why people move to this part of Connecticut, I think, to have all these outdoor amenities. And a lot of people always think of beaches when they think of Madison, but we also have a lot of other hiking trails and other parks to enjoy too, if you're not a beach person. There was just a lot of camaraderie, I think, as we did the walk, which was fun to hike with that many people. And we took a little break at the pond, and then took the Selectman's Stone's path up to the pile. And what was really fun is when we got there, we found Al's rock from 2007. So he was really excited to see that, and we picked it up and took some photos. His stone was there. A lot of the stones now are covered in algae. You can't see them all. We added our stones and took some photos and had a little, banter about the different towns, because Madison had the longest hike, but we were the first ones to get there. So we were very proud of that. It was a great vista up there. You can see the three towns from that vantage point, which is kind of cool.
So I'm going to assume there were no disputes about the border along the way.
No. We talked about how we were going to annex each other, but no disputes over border. Just a lot of enjoying the beauty of where we were and the history. And it was really kind of cool to see the pile of stones there and think about who had been there before and who had brought their stones. And it would have been neat to kind of dig through there, but we just kind of left everything the way it was and added our stones to the pile.
Okay, so we've got 169 municipalities in Connecticut. The three of you do this. Do you know of any other towns that have a similar ritual in Connecticut?
I am not aware of it. I would be surprised that other towns don't do it. I'm sure everybody did it at one point because there was a purpose to it historically. I don't know if other towns, celebrate it like that. And I don't know if there's other towns where they have this kind of nice vantage point where they come together. So I don't know.
I got to ask you, did anybody get caught smuggling a GPS along for the walk so they didn't get lost?
No, but what's interesting is I learned that a lot of people that hike now use these apps all the time, to track their hikes. There were several people on the hike that were all comparing apps that they use, and you can create these heat maps to see how often certain trails are used through these apps. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I wasn't familiar with those. And so we were talking about, is this going to promote maybe more people to go up and visit the Selectman Stones and just kind of understand the history.
Now, you had the three chief elected officials of three towns with a crowd of residents and potential voters. I'm assuming the three of you didn't exactly let that opportunity go to waste.
We did each give a little speech, so to speak, because we're elected people, right? And I think we all touched on, one of the reasons we chose to do this in October was a way to bring three communities together, and each of the selectmen were different parties. We're not all one party. Set the politics aside and just enjoy our relationship as neighbors, right? Democrats, Republicans, unaffiliated, Durham people, Madison people, Guilford people. This is a way to kind of just be together as neighbors, without politics involved. And this was, prior to the election. And that was one of the reasons I suggested that we do this in the fall. It's just a nice, lighthearted thing to do that's positive about government, positive about our communities, and how we can work together. That was a theme, I think, through all of our conversations up there. It was a fun thing to do and bring some positive just vibes, to all that's going on right now.
Well, that wraps up this episode of Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. It's not entirely clear when the next walk like this will be taking place. If recent history is any guide, we may be looking at 2037 or so, but who knows? Maybe other towns are going to start doing the same thing, walking their boundaries, and we'll find our residents learning they have more in common than maybe they supposed. I want to thank our guest for today's program, Madison First Select Woman Peggy Lyons, for her great recounting of the Boundary Walk of 2024 between Madison, Guilford, and Durham. The answer to this week's trivia question, the question was, he saw a chef's hat through smoke, tactical soldiers in insect mode, and children's daycare chairs covered in soots. What was it that Connecticut's John Maher had seen? The answer is John was the first network television cameraman to enter the pit at Ground Zero following the 9/11 attacks 2 decades ago. Next week on Amazing Tales, he's going to be sharing his harrowing and frankly haunting tales, which you simply won't believe, as we follow him that week from the first notification he got to his entry into the site of the worst attack on U.S. soil in history. Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path is a production of True North Associates, LLC. This is Mike Allen. Be safe and stay healthy.